Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. Tonight we drift into a world where sound softens, where the air grows gentle and still, and where the sky begins to release countless tiny crystals in slow, silent motion. This is the world of Snowfall, where the earth changes not with force, but with quiet patience. Snow does not arrive in a rush. It settles one delicate layer at a time, reshaping landscapes without noise, softening every edge it touches. Before we begin, allow your body to rest a little deeper. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your breathing slow into an easy, natural rhythm. Imagine the way snow falls in the dark, drifting without urgency, each flake finding its place without effort. The day begins to fade. The world dims gently. Even the air feels calmer under falling snow. Tonight, we will explore the most relaxing facts about snowfall, how it forms, how it changes sound and light, how it insulates the world, and how its quiet presence has soothed human minds for thousands of years. If you enjoy these calm journeys into the gentle side of science and nature, you're always welcome to like, subscribe, and return whenever you need stillness. But for now, let the cold soften into comfort. Let the silence deepen. Let your thoughts slow with the falling snow. Let's begin. Snow begins its life high in the quiet cold of clouds, where tiny droplets of water freeze gently into delicate crystals. Each snowflake grows slowly as more vapor settles onto its surface, building intricate branches that mirror repeating patterns found throughout nature. No two flakes ever form the same way because no two flakes travel through identical paths of temperature, moisture, and air currents. By the time snow reaches the ground, it has already completed a silent journey through shifting layers of sky, shaped by invisible forces that guide it without sound. When snow falls, it changes the way sound moves through the world. The countless tiny air pockets trapped between flakes act like natural cushions that absorb noise. Footsteps become muffled. Distant traffic fades into near silence. Even voices seem to lower without being asked. This quiet is not just an absence of sound. It is an atmosphere created by millions of tiny crystals working together to soften every vibration that touches the ground. Snowfall reshapes light as much as it reshapes sound. Bright daylight becomes diffused and gentle as it reflects off countless white surfaces. Shadows soften, edges blur into calm gradients. At night, even small sources of light glow farther and warmer as they bounce across snowy ground. The world becomes illuminated without harshness, turning streets, trees, and rooftops into quiet sculptures of soft reflection. Beneath its quiet beauty, snow acts as a powerful insulator for the earth. When it settles over soil, plants, and roots, it traps pockets of air that protect life underneath from extreme cold. Even when air temperatures plunge far below freezing, the ground beneath a thick layer of snow remains comparatively stable and protected. In this way, snowfall becomes a blanket that guards the sleeping landscape while winter passes overhead. Snow falls at different speeds depending on the shape of each flake. Larger flakes drift slowly, spinning gently as they descend. Smaller, denser flakes fall a little faster, moving with quiet purpose through the air. This slow descent gives snowfall its dreamlike quality. Nothing rushes, nothing crashes. Each flake follows its own patient path toward rest. The weight of fresh snowfall is light at first, made mostly of trapped air. As more snow layers accumulate, gentle pressure slowly changes its structure. Over time, snow becomes denser without ever becoming harsh. This gradual compression mirrors the theme of snowfall itself. Change arrives softly, layer by layer, without shock or disruption. When snow settles on trees, branches bend with quiet cooperation rather than resistance. Heavy accumulation does not cause sudden snapping in most cases. Instead, branches lower themselves gently under the added weight. The trees adjust their posture with quiet flexibility, showing how living structures respond to pressure with calm adaptation rather than force. Snow carries temperature memory within it. Fresh snow reflects sunlight and keeps surfaces cooler during the day. At night, it releases heat slowly, helping stabilize temperature swings. This rhythm of reflection and release shapes winter climates in subtle ways. Snow becomes both shield and mirror, balancing cold and warmth in alternating cycles. Snowfall slows the world in ways that go far beyond weather. Roads grow quieter, movements become careful. People naturally reduce their pace as visibility softens and surfaces change. This forced slowing often leads to a gentle inward shift as well. Thoughts settle, attention turns inward. Snowfall makes rest easier without asking permission. Even after it stops falling, snow continues working quietly. It releases moisture slowly as it melts, feeding soil, rivers and groundwater early in the growing season. What once floated silently through the sky becomes a patient source of life for months to come. Snow does not vanish when it melts, it simply changes form and continues its journey through the natural world. Snow quietly reshapes the texture of the land without ever disturbing its foundation. Hills become rounded, sharp edges soften, tiny details disappear beneath a smooth white surface. What remains is a simplified version of the world, gentle to the eyes and calming to the mind. This visual quiet helps the brain release tension because complexity fades into softness. Snow removes visual noise in the same way silence removes sound, leaving only calm space behind. Snowflakes tumble through the air in slow spirals rather than falling straight down. This movement is shaped by airflow, gravity, and the flake's own structure. Each crystal drifts, turns, and glides in a subtle dance that continues for several minutes before it ever touches the ground. Watching snow fall is like watching thousands of tiny thoughts gently lose all urgency as they float towards stillness. Snowfall changes how breathing feels. Cold air becomes cleaner and sharper, and breathing naturally slows as the body warms each inhale. The lungs fill more deeply without force. The rhythm of breath settles into a calm cycle that mirrors the slow descent of snowflakes. This is one reason snowfall often creates an unspoken feeling of peace inside the body. Snow stores silence inside itself. Even long after a storm has ended, the presence of snow on the ground continues to absorb sound. The world remains softened. Doors close more quietly. Footsteps become whispers. Even distant voices seem wrapped in fabric. The silence does not feel empty. It feels padded, as if the world has been gently tucked in. Snowfall teaches patience through stillness. Unlike rain that arrives with speed and leaves quickly, snow lingers. It rests where it lands. It remains visible for days or weeks. Its presence reminds the world that nothing needs to move quickly right now. Snow does not rush to disappear. It teaches the land how to stay for a while. Snow interacts with moonlight in a way that turns darkness into glow. At night, snow reflects even the faintest light and spreads it across the landscape. Shadows become silver instead of black. Paths become visible without needing lamps. The night becomes spacious instead of heavy. Snow makes darkness feel open rather than closed. Snowfall alters the way animals move through the world. Tracks appear where none existed. Movement becomes visible and slow. Many animals reduce activity and enter quieter patterns of survival. Others move carefully across the surface, leaving delicate signatures of passage that fade again with the next snowfall. The forest becomes a living map written in temporary lines. Snow cools the world without shocking it. Unlike sudden cold winds, snow lowers temperature gradually as it settles and reflects heat away from the surface. The cooling arrives layer by layer. The earth accepts winter slowly rather than abruptly. This gentle transition helps plants, soil, organisms, and animals adjust without stress. Snow creates a natural pause in the life of rivers. As snow stores water in frozen form on mountains and fields, rivers flow more gently during winter. They conserve their energy. When spring warmth arrives, snow melts gradually and feeds streams with slow, steady movement rather than violent flooding. Snow teaches water how to wait. Snowfall has shaped human rest patterns for thousands of years. Long before electricity, snowfall naturally signaled nighttime shelter, early sleep and quiet reflection. Firelight glowed warmer against white landscapes. Voices stayed low, stories were told slowly. Snow shaped not only the land but the rhythm of human evenings. Snow carries tiny pieces of the atmosphere inside each flake as it falls. As crystals form high in the clouds, they gather microscopic traces of dust, pollen and minerals from the air. When snow settles on the ground, it gently delivers pieces of the sky back to the earth. Each snowfall becomes a quiet exchange between heavens and land, a slow return of what once drifted above. Snow changes the way heat leaves the body. Cold air pulls warmth gently outward, encouraging the body to wrap into stillness. Muscles loosen. Movements become slower. The nervous system naturally shifts into conservation mode. This is why snowfall often makes people feel sleepy without effort. The body begins preparing for rest simply by feeling the temperature change. Snow has a natural scent that many people sense without realizing it. The clean, sharp smell in the air during snowfall is caused by charged oxygen particles and subtle chemical changes brought by cold. This scent signals freshness and calm to the brain. It is one of the reasons snowfall often feels emotionally cleansing rather than harsh. Snow reorganizes the sky into quiet layers. Clouds lower, light dims. The world becomes wrapped in a soft ceiling of motionless grey. This lowered sky creates a feeling of closeness and shelter. The distance between earth and sky feels smaller. The world feels held rather than exposed. Snow preserves the history of a single night. Footprints, animal tracks, and falling branches remain clearly marked in its surface until the next change arrives. Snow becomes a temporary memory of everything that passed through the dark hours. In the morning, the landscape tells the story of the night without words. Snow slows the rhythm of human time. Appointments soften, plans shift. People accept delays without the usual tension. The urgency of daily movement weakens gently. Snow gives permission for schedules to bend without guilt. The world learns how to pause. Snowfall reshapes how distance sounds. In open space, sound travels far and sharply. Over snow, sounds fade quickly and gently. A voice does not carry as far. Movement remains close and intimate. The world becomes smaller and quieter without shrinking physically. Snow trains the eye to notice subtle motion. In a falling storm, the only visible movement may be the slow drift of flakes against a still background. The eye learns to follow softness instead of speed. Attention becomes calm rather than alert. The body enters a watching state without tension. Snow teaches the land how to release water slowly. Instead of rain feeding rivers immediately, snow holds water in still form for weeks or months. This delayed release protects ecosystems from sudden saturation. Life receives water as a long, gentle offering instead of a short, intense surge. Snowfall marks the quiet turning of seasons more clearly than any calendar. The first snow signals withdrawal. The deep winter snow signals rest. The final melting snow signals awakening. These transitions arrive silently, yet they guide the rhythm of plants, animals, and human emotions alike. Snow teaches gravity how to be gentle. Instead of falling in heavy sheets like rain, each flake drifts downward with slow surrender, guided by air currents rather than urgency. Even the pull of the planet feels softened during snowfall. Nothing drops quickly. Nothing strikes the ground with force. Gravity itself seems to slow down for a while as snow reminds the world that even the strongest pull can feel tender. Snow organizes chaos into calm order. In a storm, countless flakes fall at once. each following a slightly different path. Yet the overall movement feels peaceful rather than frantic. There is no collision that disturbs the whole. Each flake finds a resting place without competing with the next. This quiet coordination reflects a deeper truth of nature, that disorder can still arrive gently. Snow reshapes how time feels during waking hours. A few minutes spent watching snowfall often feel longer than the same minutes spent indoors. The steady motion slows the brain's internal clock. Thoughts stretch, the mind drifts, the body forgets urgency. Snow teaches the nervous system how to live inside slow time. Snow affects how the heart responds to the environment. Cold air encourages blood to circulate more deliberately. The heartbeat steadies. The body conserves energy with quiet efficiency. This physical shift works together with visual calm to deepen the feeling of rest that snowfall brings. Snow invites the eyes to rest on repetition without boredom. Each flake follows familiar patterns of descent, yet no two paths are identical. The mind remains gently engaged without becoming overstimulated. This balance between sameness and variation is one of the reasons snowfall feels hypnotic rather than dull. Snow carries the quiet weight of the season with humility. It settles on roofs, branches, roads, and fields without announcing itself. Gradually, the entire world looks different, yet nothing announces the change loudly. Snow does not claim space, it simply occupies it with softness. Snow changes how warmth feels indoors. After time spent outside in falling snow, the return to warmth feels deeper and more comforting. The contrast heightens awareness of heat and safety. Firelight glows more richly. Blankets feel heavier and more protective. Snow enhances rest even after it is left behind. Snow listens to the shape of the land as it falls. On flat ground it spreads evenly. On slopes it angles downward. On branches it gathers where support is strongest. Snow does not force uniformity, it adapts to form with quiet intelligence. Snow makes even familiar places feel new. Streets, trees, rooftops and paths become transformed into unfamiliar landscapes reshaped by white silence. The ordinary becomes dreamlike. The known feels freshly discovered again. Snow renews perception without changing location. Snow is one of the few weather forms that invites both motion and stillness at the same time. People step outside to walk in it slowly. Others pause to watch it without moving at all. Snow does not demand one response. It gently makes space for both movement and rest. Snow gently teaches the world how to be quiet without taking anything away. When it settles across roofs, roads and trees, sharp edges disappear and harsh lines soften into curves. What once felt rigid becomes gentle. The landscape does not lose its shape. It simply relaxes into it. This visual softness gives the mind permission to release tension without effort, as if the world itself is exhaling for you. Snow carries an ancient stillness within it that predates cities, roads, and artificial noise. Long before human structures existed, snow was already falling into forests, across valleys, onto mountains, and over frozen lakes. When you watch snowfall today, you're witnessing the same quiet movement that calmed the earth thousands of years ago. That ancient calm still lives inside each drifting flake. Snow encourages the body to conserve energy in a way that feels safe rather than restrictive. Muscles naturally loosen, movements slow, people wrap themselves in warmth without urgency. The body understands that this season is for gentler motion and deeper rest. Snow does not demand activity, it quietly invites stillness. Snow transforms the night into a softer version of itself. Streetlights glow wider, moonlight spreads farther. Even the darkest hours feel gently illuminated. The contrast between shadow and light becomes smooth rather than sharp. Snow does not brighten the night aggressively, it teaches darkness how to glow softly instead. Snow reshapes the meaning of distance. In snowy air, objects appear closer than they truly are because light is scattered gently through falling flakes. The far feels near. The horizon feels intimate. The world draws inward rather than stretching outward. This shrinking of space nurtures feelings of shelter and closeness. Snow alters how the brain responds to movement. Normally, the nervous system stays alert to fast changes. During snowfall, motion becomes slow and predictable. The brain shifts from alert scanning to passive watching. Thoughts naturally quiet. Snow changes the mind's pacing without conscious effort. Snow continues working even when it lies still. Beneath its quiet surface, temperature shifts slowly. Moisture migrates gently downward. Soil organisms remain protected and active under insulated layers. What appears frozen from above remains alive beneath. Snow becomes a hidden cradle for winter life. Snow teaches balance between holding and releasing. It holds water safely for weeks. Then it releases it slowly in spring. It covers the land completely. Then it vanishes without resistance. Snow never clings. It simply completes its cycle and lets go. Snow invites people to look upward rather than forward. Instead of staring at screens or paths, eyes often follow flakes drifting down from the sky. Awareness lifts naturally. Breath slows. Attention rises quietly. Snow brings the gaze back to the space between earth and sky. Snowfall gently erases yesterday without destroying the land beneath it. Tracks fade, marks disappear, shadows soften, but nothing is harmed by this erasing. The ground remains safe below its cover. Snow resets the surface without wounding the foundation. Snow quietly changes how the world holds vibration. When flakes gather on the ground, tiny air spaces form between crystals, and these pockets absorb sound before it can travel far. Even distant movement becomes softened into gentle hush. The world does not fall silent all at once. It fades into quiet gradually, as if each sound is being wrapped in a soft layer of rest. This is why snowfall feels like the earth lowering its own volume. Snow creates a slow conversation between sky and soil. What begins as invisible vapor high above slowly becomes visible form, then settles gently into the ground where it will wait again. This long descent turns motion into stillness and stillness back into motion through seasons. Snow does not hurry through this exchange. It gives every stage its full time to exist. Snow reshapes how cold feels on the skin. Unlike sharp winter wind, snowfall cools the body evenly. The cold arrives as a soft veil rather than a sudden strike. Cheeks cool slowly. Breath grows visible without shock. The body adjusts without feeling attacked. Snow transforms cold into something gentler and easier to accept. Snow invites the nervous system into a watching state rather than a reacting state. Instead of tracking danger or urgency, the eyes follow slow drifting motion. This shift tells the brain that nothing immediate is required. Muscles soften, the jaw relaxes. The body enters a state of quiet observation without effort. Snow makes the complicated world feel simple again. Lines become smoother. Details disappear beneath white layers. The clutter of colour softens into calm uniformity. This visual simplicity gives the mind a place to rest because fewer choices reach the eye. Less complexity means less effort to understand what is seen. Snow influences how animals breathe through winter air. Cold air becomes denser and drier, encouraging slower and deeper breaths. Many animals naturally reduce activity during snowfall, curling inward to preserve warmth. Their breathing slows, their movements soften. Snow guides life toward conservation rather than exertion. Snow reminds the land how to be gentle with itself. Without snow, frost would strike the soil harshly. With snow, cold arrives padded and gradual. The ground remains insulated beneath layered crystals. Life beneath continues quietly. Snow becomes a protective veil that allows winter to exist without destruction. Snow changes how light feels inside the eyes. Brightness reflected off snow is diffused rather than direct. The light does not pierce, it spreads. This softened brightness reduces eye strain and creates a feeling of spacious calm. Even daytime under snowfall feels like twilight. Snow turns wind into a quiet companion instead of a force. As flakes move through air, the wind carries them in curves rather than straight lines. Gusts become visible in slow drifting patterns. Wind becomes something to watch rather than something to avoid. Snow teaches the art of arriving without demanding space. It settles on every surface without pushing anything aside. It does not displace. It simply rests. The land accepts it easily. Snow shows how presence can be gentle rather than forceful. Snow gently changes the way the ground remembers movement. Footsteps that press into fresh snow leave temporary impressions that slowly soften, blur, and fade with time. Nothing remains sharply marked. Even the evidence of passing life dissolves back into smoothness. Snow teaches the land that no impact must remain permanent. Everything can be softened again. Snow carries a natural quiet that is not empty but full. Beneath falling snow, the air feels dense with stillness, as if silence itself has volume. This fullness of quiet wraps around the senses and creates a feeling of being enclosed in peace rather than exposed to nothingness. The world does not feel absent, it feels held. Snow changes the emotional meaning of darkness. On ordinary nights, darkness can feel heavy or unknown. During snowfall, darkness becomes gentle and visible through drifting white motion. You can see the night moving softly around you. The fear of what cannot be seen dissolves as the snow reveals the shape of the air itself. Snow trains the body to trust stillness. As the world slows down visually and mentally, the body learns that it is safe to remain quiet. The urge to move constantly fades. Even restlessness loses its momentum. Snow makes stillness feel natural instead of forced. Snow teaches water how to disappear slowly. Instead of rushing away as rain, snowfall stores moisture in quiet suspension. What once fell becomes patient, waiting weeks or months before returning to rivers and soil. This delayed return allows the world below to receive water without shock or overload. Snow becomes the art of slow return. Snow reshapes the way warmth feels when it finally arrives. The first heat after snowfall feels richer because the body has learned contrast. Warm drinks feel deeper. Fires glow brighter. Blankets feel heavier and more protective. Snow does not only cool the world, it prepares the feeling of warmth to be fully experienced. Snow invites memory to slow down. Many people remember snow moments with unusual clarity. The way streetlights glowed, the soundless streets, the way breath looked in the air. Snow stills the rush of perception so memories form without being crowded by distraction. Snow reshapes how distance is perceived in sound as well as sight. A door closing nearby sounds close and soft. A voice farther away sounds like a whisper instead of a call. The world feels smaller and safer when sound does not travel far. Snow wraps distance in intimacy. Snow teaches the eyes to rest in subtle movement. Instead of tracking fast motion, the eyes follow slow drifting flakes. This rhythm does not demand reaction, it invites observation without tension. The muscles around the eyes relax naturally, easing the mind with them. Snow quietly dissolves urgency without asking permission. Schedules bend, people move with care, time stretches. The world does not announce that it has slowed down, it simply becomes slower by existing in snow. Even impatience loses its sharp edges. Snow slowly reshapes how the sky feels above you. As flakes descend, the space between cloud and ground seems to thicken. The air no longer feels vast or empty. It feels layered and close, as if the sky itself has drifted lower to rest near the earth. This closeness creates a quiet sense of shelter, as though the world has gently closed its doors for the night. Snow teaches patience through repetition. Flake after flake falls in the same unhurried way, yet the landscape changes steadily with each tiny arrival. Nothing dramatic happens in any single second. But minute by minute, hour by hour, the entire world becomes transformed. Snow shows how great change can be built entirely from small, quiet moments. Snow alters how the body hears its own presence. When sound is absorbed by falling flakes and padded ground, internal sounds become more noticeable. Breathing grows audible, heartbeats feel closer. Even the soft movement of clothing seems louder in the quiet. Snow gently turns awareness inward without effort. Snow forms a soft boundary between seasons. It marks the gradual withdrawal of warmth and the gentle arrival of deep winter. Unlike sudden weather shifts, snow arrives like an agreement between cold and land. It does not force winter into existence. It introduces it slowly. Snowfall changes how the world feels underfoot. Each step becomes deliberate. The body adjusts its balance. Movement becomes careful and aware. The ground no longer feels fixed and certain. It becomes responsive and slow. Snow teaches tension without urgency. Snow quiets not only sound, but expectation. Plans loosen. Destinations feel less rigid. The day feels open to change without conflict. Snow invites flexibility without speaking. The world becomes willing to adapt instead of resist. Snow influences how light rests on the face. Reflected glow rises from the ground and meets the eyes from below, softening shadows and lifting gentle brightness upward. The face feels warmed by reflected light even in cold air. Snow teaches light how to rise quietly. Snow reminds the mind that emptiness can be full. Large white spaces may look simple, but they hold air, light, sound, and motion inside them. Snow-covered fields may look empty, yet they store moisture, life, and hidden movement beneath their surface. Snow turns apparent emptiness into quiet richness. Snow softens emotional edges the way it softens physical ones. Tension loosens, frustration slows. Even sadness often becomes quieter and more reflective rather than sharp. Snow does not erase feeling. It gives feeling space to rest. Snowfall gently separates the rush of the world from the rhythm of the mind. As the outer world slows, inner thoughts follow. The chase of attention weakens. The mind drifts more easily into gentle wandering. Snow becomes a bridge between waking and rest. Snow teaches the world how to rest without fully stopping. Even when everything looks still beneath falling flakes, motion continues quietly beneath the surface. Water shifts beneath ice. Roots breathe in the dark soil. Animals move softly beneath snow layers. Snow shows that rest does not mean absence of life. It means life moving at its most peaceful speed. Snow reshapes how waiting feels. Instead of impatience, waiting becomes natural. Roadways clear slowly, paths open gradually. Destinations arrive when they arrive. Snow turns waiting into an accepted state rather than a disturbance. Time slows without apology. Snow invites the hands to remember texture. When fingers brush against fresh snowfall, the sensation is light, cool, and fleeting. It melts almost instantly into water, reminding the nervous system how touch can be temporary and gentle. Snow never grips the skin, it passes through it. Snow redefines the meaning of weight. Though entire landscapes become covered, the individual flakes feel almost weightless. What appears heavy is built from what feels nearly invisible. Snow becomes a quiet lesson in how lightness can accumulate into great change. Snow influences the way the brain releases tension. The steady visual motion combined with softened sound triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the part of the brain responsible for rest, digestion, and calm. Snow gently switches the body from alert mode into restoration mode without conscious instruction. Snow teaches humility through consistency. It returns year after year without asking for recognition. It falls on grand mountains and small doorsteps with equal care. Snow does not choose importance. It shares its quiet presence with everything. Snow reshapes how direction feels. Paths blur, lines disappear, corners soften. The world becomes less defined by straight movement and more shaped by slow curves. Direction loses urgency, nothing insists on being followed quickly. Snow gives silence a visible form. Instead of being only an absence of sound, silence becomes something you can see drifting through the air. Snow makes quiet tangible. It allows the eyes to witness stillness. Snow influences how memory feels after winter has passed. When warmth returns and snow disappears, the quiet it created lingers in recall. People often remember snow not for its cold, but for its calm. The memory itself remains slow and silent long after the flakes are gone. Snow teaches the earth how to begin again without drama. As it melts, it does not vanish suddenly, it fades. Water returns quietly to soil and streams. The white surface withdraws without leaving harm behind. Snow shows how endings can be gentle. Snow reshapes how the world feels at the edge of sleep. As flakes drift past windows and settle on ledges, the boundary between inside and outside softens. The warmth of the room and the cold of the sky feel connected rather than opposed. Snow becomes a bridge between shelter and open space, allowing the mind to relax without feeling confined. Snow quietly teaches the art of letting go. No flake struggles against the air as it falls. Each one releases itself fully into motion without resistance. It does not cling to the sky. It does not fear the ground. Snowfall becomes a slow demonstration of surrender without loss. Snow gently alters how the brain measures effort. Tasks that once felt simple become slower, yet not harder. Walking takes more care. Driving becomes more patient. Every action stretches slightly. This stretching does not feel like burden. It feels like permission to move without haste. Snow changes the way stillness is experienced in the body. When the outer world grows quiet, inner noise becomes easier to hear. Breathing deepens naturally. The chest softens. The jaw releases. Snow invites the body to rest in awareness instead of tension. Snow teaches the land how to carry silence forward. Even after the last flake has fallen, the quiet lingers. The echo of snowfall remains in softened sound and padded movement. The world stays gentle long after the storm has passed. Snow reshapes how the mind experiences freshness. The air feels newly washed. The scent of cold carries clarity. Even familiar streets feel renewed beneath untouched snow. Snow offers the feeling of beginning again without erasing what came before. Snow changes how time is stored in the body. During long winter nights under snowfall, memories form slowly and deeply. These memories often return years later with the same quiet calm attached to them. Snow embeds peace into recollection. Snow teaches the difference between emptiness and openness. Snow-covered spaces may look blank, but they are filled with reflection, insulation, sound absorption, and quiet motion. Snow shows that what seems empty can actually be full of quiet work. Snow invites the questioning mind to rest. Instead of asking what comes next, the presence of snow satisfies the moment itself. The need for outcome softens. The mind becomes content to watch without seeking. Snow reminds the earth how to sleep. Under a blanket of white, the planet slows its surface rhythms while life continues patiently below. Snow does not stop the world. It allows the world to rest without fear of stopping. Snow changes how the mind experiences space inside a room. When flakes drift past a window, the outside world becomes part of the interior quiet. The glass no longer feels like a barrier. It becomes a soft boundary where warmth and cold, light and shadow, motion and stillness meet peacefully. The eyes rest on this moving stillness, and the room itself seems to breathe more slowly. Snow teaches the nervous system that softness can be stronger than force. A single flake feels almost without weight, yet millions together can reshape rooftops, fields, and forests. This quiet strength never announces itself with noise. It arrives gently and continues patiently. Snow reminds the body that endurance does not need to be loud. Snow changes how anticipation feels. Instead of restless waiting, snowfall brings a calm readiness. People look toward windows without urgency. They notice without chasing the moment. Snow turns expectation into observation. Nothing needs to happen quickly for satisfaction to exist. Snow gives the wind something gentle to carry. Instead of pushing empty air, the wind now moves visible flakes in soft arcs and drifting layers. The movement becomes something to watch rather than something that only touches the skin. Snow allows the invisible to become slow and visible. Snow alters how the ground receives weight. The first footprints press softly into a surface that yields instead of resists. The ground does not push back sharply, it gives. This yielding changes how the body places its weight, inviting careful motion rather than forceful steps. Snow transforms ordinary light into atmosphere. Lamps no longer simply illuminate an object. They create glowing halos suspended in falling flakes. Light becomes something you can see moving through space. Snow turns brightness into something that drifts instead of strikes. Snow reshapes how the mind understands quiet effort. Even while appearing completely still, snow continues to settle, compress, and rearrange itself layer by layer. The inner structure of snow quietly changes long after it lands. Stillness does not mean stagnation. It means slow, invisible motion. Snow softens the edges of memory as it does the edges of land. Moments that happen during snowfall often return in the mind with gentler emotion attached to them. Even difficult memories feel quieter when snow is part of the scene. The mind remembers snow as a filter of calm. Snow gently encourages the body to curl inward. Shoulders relax, hands tuck closer to warmth. The spine settles into softer posture. The body instinctively moves toward protection and rest without being told. Snow stimulates comfort-seeking without urgency. Snow becomes a quiet invitation to pause without explanation. It does not ask for justification. It does not require permission. When snow falls, the world simply slows. The pause feels natural rather than forced. Snow gives rest its own season and its own reason. Snow quietly reshapes how the body feels temperature across its surface. Instead of sharp contrast between cold wind and sheltered warmth, snow creates a gentler gradient of cold that spreads evenly through the air. The skin does not feel attacked by temperature, it feels slowly embraced by it. This gentle cooling reduces shock and allows the body to loosen rather than tense. Snow teaches the eyes how to rest in brightness without strain. The light reflecting from snow is spread in all directions instead of cutting in sharp lines. This scattered light reduces visual harshness and creates a soft glow that feels comforting rather than demanding. The eyes remain open longer without fatigue. Vision itself feels calm. Snow shifts the emotional tone of a landscape without changing its structure. The same streets, trees, and buildings remain exactly where they were before. Yet their presence feels different under snow. The mood of the place transforms without anything being moved. Snow changes feeling without relocating form. Snow reshapes how the mind senses distance and time. The present moment feels wider. Minutes stretch. The gap between now and later softens. Snow makes it easier to stay with what is happening instead of rushing toward what comes next. The future feels less demanding. Snow gently alters how voices behave in space. Words fall into the air and do not travel far. Conversations become closer and quieter. The world encourages softer speaking without instruction. Snow does not enforce silence, it simply invites gentleness. Snow invites the hands to experience temperature as sensation rather than discomfort. When snow touches bare skin, the cold is immediate but fleeting. It melts and disappears almost instantly. The sensation passes before it can become unpleasant. Snow teaches the body that even cold can be temporary and light. Snow changes how the body understands movement through resistance. Instead of firm ground beneath the feet, snow yields slightly with each step. This yielding teaches the muscles to move with balance rather than force. Each step becomes an act of careful placement rather than momentum. Snow gives the night a visible rhythm. In darkness, flakes drift past lights in repeating waves. Their slow passage marks time without clocks. The eyes can follow seconds without numbers. Snow turns the flow of the night into quiet motion. Snow influences how the mind experiences solitude. Being alone during snowfall rarely feels empty. The presence of falling flakes creates companionship in motion. The world still feels active even when no other life is visible. Snow becomes a quiet companion for solitary moments. Snow redefines what it means for the world to be awake. Under snowfall, activity does not stop. It simply shifts into slower forms. Life continues in quieter layers beneath white cover and inside warm rooms. Snow teaches that waking and resting can exist at the same time. Snow quietly reshapes how the mind experiences boundaries. When flakes fall through open space, the line between ground and sky becomes harder to define. The air feels layered instead of empty. The world no longer feels divided into separate parts. Everything feels gently connected through slow, drifting motion. Snow changes how the body interprets silence. Instead of feeling like absence, silence becomes something that surrounds and supports. The quiet feels padded and full rather than hollow. Snow turns silence into a presence that feels protective instead of lonely. Snow invites the eyes to follow motion without chasing it. The descent of each flake is slow enough that the mind does not feel pressure to keep up. Attention simply rests on the movement instead of pursuing it. Watching becomes effortless rather than active. Snow softens the relationship between effort and result. A world altered by snow is created through countless tiny actions that feel almost weightless on their own. This teaches the mind that meaningful change does not always require strain or intensity. Sometimes it arrives through accumulation of softness. Snow gently alters how the body senses balance. With each step on snow, micro-adjustments happen through the legs, feet, and core. These adjustments remain subtle and slow. The body becomes more aware of itself without becoming tense. Movement becomes mindful without intention. Snow transforms how the night holds light. Instead of light disappearing into darkness, it lingers and spreads across reflective surfaces. Even faint illumination feels amplified and distant shapes remain visible. Snow teaches darkness how to glow without force. Snow makes the passage of air visible. Breath rises in pale clouds. Wind draws faint lines through falling flakes. The invisible becomes slow and observable. Snow allows the body to see the motion of the atmosphere itself. Snow quiets not only sound, but thought patterns. Repetitive worries often lose momentum under snowfall. The mind becomes less interested in looping and more content to drift. Snow encourages thoughts to move in straight, unhurried lines instead of tight circles. Snow changes how the earth receives pressure. Roads, fields, and forests bear added weight without protest as snow settles. The land accepts this downward presence patiently. Snow teaches the surface of the planet how to carry without resistance. Snow becomes a gentle teacher of impermanence. Each flake is visible only briefly before melting, compressing, or becoming part of a larger layer. Nothing about snow tries to remain separate for long. Snow shows how individuality can dissolve softly into shared stillness. Snow softens the way the world holds contrast. Sharp differences between light and dark, warm and cold, stillness and motion all begin to blend into smoother transitions. The mind no longer has to jump between extremes. Everything moves through gentle gradients instead of sudden shifts. This soft blending is one reason snowfall feels emotionally comforting and visually peaceful. Snow changes how the body experiences pause. When snowfall begins, many people instinctively stop what they are doing to watch. This pause is not planned. It rises naturally from within. The body recognizes that the environment has shifted into a slower rhythm and follows without resistance. Snow teaches the body how to stop without effort. Snow invites the ears to listen for what is no longer there. Loud echoing sounds disappear. Harsh edges in noise dissolve. In their place, faint subtle sounds become noticeable. The soft brush of clothing, the distant hum of air. Snow trains the senses to notice quiet detail instead of strong signal. Snow influences how the mind experiences safety. The softened ground, the reduced movement, and the muffled sound all combine to create an environment that feels protected rather than exposed. Even open spaces begin to feel enclosed by silence. Snow wraps the world in an atmosphere of quiet shelter. Snow teaches the lesson of accumulation without strain. One flake changes nothing. 10,000 flakes change an entire field. The process is slow and patient. There is no visible urgency. Snow shows how the smallest actions can slowly reshape the largest landscapes without pressure. Snow reshapes how memory attaches to space. Places experienced during snowfall are often remembered with heightened clarity and emotion. The stillness imprints deeply. Years later, even small details return with unusual softness. Snow engraves calm into recollection. Snow invites the mind to shift from striving to observing. No effort is required to experience snowfall. There is nothing to solve, nothing to improve. The only invitation is to witness. Snow turns attention into simple presence. Snow changes the feeling of motion inside still rooms. Even indoors, when snow falls outside a window, the sense of movement enters the room through light and shadow. The interior space feels less rigid and more fluid. Snow allows motion to exist without disturbance. Snow alters how patience feels in the body. Waiting no longer feels like delay. It feels like part of the environment. Snow teaches that waiting can be a state of ease instead of tension. Snow reminds the nervous system how to settle into long, quiet stretches of time. During snowfall, the body senses that nothing immediate is demanded. This allows deeper rest to arrive naturally. Snow creates permission for extended stillness without guilt. Snow quietly shifts how the mind experiences effort versus ease. The simple act of watching snowfall requires no intention and no direction. The eyes drift. The breathing deepens. Thought loosens its grip. Snow shows the nervous system how to experience without doing, how to be present without trying. Snow changes how the body feels space around itself. Cold air carries sound less sharply and motion more slowly. The space between objects feels softer and closer. The body no longer feels surrounded by sharp distance. It feels held within a gentler atmosphere. Snow teaches the world how to speak in whispers instead of commands. There are no loud arrivals, no sudden crashes, only the soft accumulation of small movements. Snow communicates through presence rather than force. It shows how influence can be quiet and still be complete. Snow reshapes how perception handles detail. When everything is covered in white, the eye stops chasing complex patterns and begins resting on broad surfaces. The mind releases its need to sort and categorize. It accepts what is seen without analysis. Snow teaches perception how to soften. Snow creates a peaceful illusion of slow motion in the waking world. Cars move carefully. People step gently. Even animals adjust their pace. Snow stretches movement into longer moments. The world appears to move through softened time instead of ordinary speed. Snow gently alters how the body senses texture beneath the feet. Packed snow feels different from powder. Each gives way in its own quiet manner. Walking becomes a conversation between weight and surface rather than a simple act of movement. The body learns subtlety in every step. Snow teaches the art of being visible without being loud. Even though it transforms the entire landscape, it does so without noise. Snow becomes the clearest example of how deep change does not require disturbance. Snow invites the breath to become slower without instruction. Cold air naturally lengthens inhalation and softens exhalation. The lungs adjust without resistance. The rhythm of breathing quietly syncs with the rhythm of falling flakes. Snow reminds the mind that cycles do not rush. Winter arrives in layers. Depth builds through repetition. Nothing appears all at once. Snow teaches that beginnings and endings unfold through patient layering rather than sudden arrival. Snow changes how darkness feels at the edge of sleep. When the night outside is filled with falling flakes, the mind feels less alone in the dark. Movement continues gently beyond the walls. Snow keeps the darkness company so that rest does not feel isolated. Snow gently reshapes how the mind experiences continuity. As flakes fall one after another without interruption, the brain stops separating moments into before and after. The sense of sequence softens. Everything begins to feel like one long, continuous present. This flowing sameness is one reason Snowfall feels so deeply meditative. There is no clear start or finish to focus on, only steady, unbroken motion. Snow changes how the world holds scent. Cold air carries fewer strong smells, and falling snow cleans the atmosphere as it descends. The air becomes faint, neutral, nearly invisible to the nose. Breathing feels lighter and simpler. The absence of strong scent helps the mind settle into neutrality without distraction. Snow teaches the land how to accept layering without resistance. Each new inch settles onto what came before it without conflict. Lower layers compress gently and adapt to the weight above. Nothing collapses in protest. Snow demonstrates how pressure can be received calmly when it arrives gradually. Snow alters how the eyes experience distance at night. Lights appear softer and more dispersed. The boundaries of objects fade into glow rather than sharp edges. The night feels wrapped in a veil rather than cut by darkness. This visual softness allows the eyes to relax fully instead of scanning for contrast. Snow quietly rearranges how the body measures temperature comfort. Instead of reacting sharply to cold, the body adapts slowly beneath steady cooling. Blood flow adjusts gently. Muscles stay loose rather than contracting in defense. Snow teaches the body how to settle into unfamiliar temperature without stress. Snow invites the listener to hear the smallest sounds of the body. In the absence of loud outside noise, subtle internal rhythms become noticeable. The pulse in the ears, the soft rise and fall of breath, the gentle shift of fabric with each movement. Snow teaches attention to turn inward without forcing it. Snow changes how effort feels inside the legs and feet. Every step through snow requires slightly more awareness than walking on bare ground. This added attention slows movement without increasing strain. Walking becomes mindful without feeling deliberate. Snow naturally invites awareness of motion. Snow creates a dreamlike quality in waking life. Familiar places appear altered, covered, softened, and simplified. This gentle transformation disrupts automatic perception and awakens quiet curiosity. The mind briefly returns to a childlike state of noticing without demanding explanation. Snow teaches how to leave without being abrupt. When it melts, it does not vanish instantly. It retreats little by little. Patches fade, surfaces gradually reappear. Snow shows how endings can unfold slowly without shock or loss. Snow reminds the world that quiet does not mean empty. Under the white surface, insects rest. Roots store energy, water waits in frozen form, and heat still travels slowly through soil. Stillness does not halt life, it simply lowers the volume of its motion. Snow gently reshapes how the mind experiences repetition. Flakes fall again and again in the same quiet manner, yet the moment never feels boring. The repetition does not drain attention, it steadies it. The mind stops searching for what is different and begins resting in what is constant. Snow teaches that repetition can be calming rather than dull. Snow changes how the body senses protection. As layers build on rooftops and trees, there is a feeling of being tucked beneath a soft covering even when indoors. The world feels insulated not just from cold but from harshness. Snow creates the impression that everything fragile is being watched over quietly. Snow teaches how to arrive without announcement. There is no sound when the first flakes touch the ground. The change is visible before it is felt. The world transforms without warning and without harm. Snow shows that arrival does not require disturbance. Snow alters how the eyes interpret space at a distance. Mountains appear closer. Trees seem nearer. The far world gently leans inward. Snow brings distant things into softer reach without moving them physically. Snow invites the mind to release control. There is no way to direct where each flake will fall. No way to manage how quickly it gathers. Snow unfolds entirely on its own terms. Watching it encourages the mind to let go of directing and simply observe. Snow changes the feeling of time passing inside the body. Muscles rest longer between movements. The urge to rush weakens. The day stretches gently without feeling long. Snow dissolves pressure from the clock without removing the hours. Snow teaches how the smallest interactions can shape the largest moods. A single glance at falling flakes can soften the entire emotional tone of an evening. Snow changes feeling through atmosphere rather than instruction. Snow influences how the body releases heat while resting. Under steady cold, the body draws warmth inward and protects it efficiently. This inward shift supports deeper relaxation and heavier limbs. Snow encourages the body to turn towards stillness naturally. Snow reveals the movement of air in slow, graceful lines. As flakes drift sideways, curve, or pause briefly mid-air, the invisible currents of wind become visible in motion. Snow allows the eye to see what normally cannot be seen. Snow shows how the world can change completely without feeling unfamiliar. Even when everything is covered, the landscape still feels like itself. Snow transforms without erasing. It layers gentleness over what already exists. Snow gently reshapes how the mind experiences completion. Under snowfall, things rarely feel finished in a sharp or final way. There is always another flake descending, another soft layer settling, another quiet moment unfolding. The mind releases the pressure to reach an endpoint and begins to rest inside continuation itself. Snow teaches that completeness does not always arrive as an ending. Sometimes it arrives as steady presence. Snow changes how the body receives the idea of shelter. Even in open spaces, snowfall creates a feeling of enclosure without walls. The air itself feels like a soft ceiling and a gentle boundary. The body no longer scans the environment for protection. It senses that protection already exists in the atmosphere. Snow teaches the eyes to find comfort in simplicity. With colours reduced and details softened, the visual field becomes less demanding. The eyes move more slowly. The muscles behind them relax. Vision becomes something you rest within rather than something you use for searching or analysing. Snow quietly reshapes how the mind understands effort in nature. There is no visible labour in the way flakes fall, no strain in the way layers build. The landscape changes without visible resistance. Snow teaches the nervous system that not all power looks like force. Sometimes power looks like patience. Snow gently alters how the body experiences nighttime awareness. As the outside world grows quieter and dimmer, the internal world becomes easier to sense. The rise and fall of the chest, the warmth inside the hands, the slow shift of the ribs with each breath. Snow turns awareness inward without demanding focus. Snow creates a shared rhythm between sky and ground. The descent of flakes and the settling of layers mirror one another in the same slow language of gravity. The sky releases, the earth receives. This exchange repeats without interruption, creating a quiet dialogue that continues through the night. Snow reshapes how the mind experiences distraction. During snowfall, external interruptions lose sharpness. Sounds from far away become hushed. Visual movement becomes slow and predictable. The mind no longer jumps outward as easily. Snow gently draws attention back toward the center. Snow teaches how to exist without announcing intention. It does not declare when it will begin or when it will end. It simply arrives and fades on its own time. Watching snowfall reminds the mind that not everything needs intention to be meaningful. Snow changes how the body experiences cold at rest. Instead of feeling piercing or aggressive, the cold becomes steady and even. The skin adjusts without flinching. The body does not tense in defense. Snow teaches the body how to meet cold with calm rather than resistance. Snow gently reminds the mind that quiet moments do not need to be filled. There is no requirement to add music, words, or motion to snowfall. Its presence alone is complete. Snow teaches the art of being with what is already enough. Snow gently reshapes how the mind experiences waiting. During snowfall, waiting no longer feels like a pause between actions. It becomes the action itself. The mind settles into the rhythm of watching without anticipation. There is nothing to arrive at, nothing to complete. Snow turns waiting into rest. Snow changes the way the body feels its own weight. As the world slows, gravity feels more present and more comforting. The body settles deeper into stillness. The sense of being held becomes stronger than the sense of needing to move. Snow encourages surrender to rest without resistance. Snow teaches the nervous system how to feel quiet without boredom. The steady, repeating motion of falling flakes occupies attention just enough to prevent restlessness. The mind stays gently engaged while relaxing at the same time. Snow creates the perfect balance between stimulation and calm. Snow alters how the heart perceives loneliness. Under snowfall, solitude does not feel empty. The soft movement outside becomes a companion presence. The heart no longer feels isolated and quiet. Snow turns being alone into a shared moment with the world itself. Snow reshapes how temperature travels through space. Cold does not arrive in sharp gusts but spreads slowly across surfaces. The chill becomes evenly distributed. The skin adapts gradually. Snow teaches the body how to accept cold without shock. Snow gently transforms the way sound fades. Instead of stopping abruptly, noise dissolves into the air as if absorbed by invisible fabric. The ears no longer brace for sudden silence. Snow creates endings that feel rounded rather than cut. Snow invites the mind to release the need for contrast. Without strong colours or sharp edges, the world becomes a study in gentle variation. White holds many shades within it. The eye relaxes into subtle difference instead of dramatic change. Snow teaches how to move without urgency. Steps shorten, gestures slow, even simple actions gain softness. Snow trains the body to treat motion as something careful and considered rather than automatic. Snow changes how the brain processes rhythm. Without the usual noise patterns of wind, traffic and voices, the dominant rhythm becomes the internal rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The body returns to its own natural tempo under snowfall. Snow reminds the mind that quiet does not require explanation. There is no reason given for the hush. It simply arrives. Snow shows that peace can exist without purpose or justification. Snow gently reshapes how the mind experiences boundaries between inside and outside. When flakes drift beyond a window, the outside world feels closer without feeling intrusive. The glass becomes a quiet meeting place between warmth and cold, stillness and motion. The mind no longer feels separated from the night. It feels gently connected to it. Snow changes the way the body understands still air. During snowfall, the atmosphere becomes thick with tiny drifting shapes, making the air feel present rather than empty. Breathing feels slower and more deliberate. Each inhale feels like it carries quiet into the lungs. Each exhale feels like a release into space. Snow teaches the nervous system how to trust slowness. As movement in the environment slows, the brain releases its need to stay alert. The body no longer prepares for sudden change. Muscles soften, thoughts lengthen. Snow retrains the body to feel safe in slower rhythms. Snow alters how the world receives weight without strain. Flakes settle on branches, rooftops, and cables so lightly at first that nothing stirs. Even as layers build, the weight arrives in stages rather than all at once. Snow teaches that pressure can be received gradually without damage. Snow gently changes how the mind experiences repetition across time. Each snowfall feels familiar, yet no storm is ever exactly the same. The brain relaxes into the known while remaining quietly attentive to subtle differences. Snow becomes a lesson in comfort through variation rather than surprise. Snow quiets the space between sounds rather than only the sounds themselves. The pause after footsteps grows longer. The gap between distant noises widens. Silence stretches without feeling empty. Snow teaches that what lies between sounds is just as important as sound itself. Snow reshapes how warmth feels within the chest. Cold air naturally encourages deeper breathing, filling the lungs more fully before gently releasing. The chest expands more slowly. The breath becomes rounder and heavier. Snow encourages the breath to become a steady anchor for the body. Snow invites the eyes to rest on motion without destination. Flakes drift without urgency, without a clear endpoint that needs to be anticipated. The eyes follow without seeking arrival. The mind learns the comfort of watching without waiting for result. Snow teaches the art of gentle persistence. It does not fall all at once. It does not overwhelm in a single moment. It arrives through quiet continuation. Over time, what seemed delicate becomes transformative. Snow demonstrates how softness can be enduring. Snow reminds the mind that the world still moves even when everything feels paused. Beneath the snow, water continues to flow slowly. Roots shift quietly. Heat travels gently through soil. Snow shows that stillness and motion are not opposites but companions. Snow gently reshapes how the mind experiences motion within stillness. Even when everything around appears frozen and unmoving, snowfall introduces a soft, continuous drift that keeps the world alive without stirring it awake. This quiet movement reassures the brain that change can happen without disturbance. It teaches that motion does not always mean disruption. Sometimes, motion can be as gentle as breath. Snow changes how the body recognizes rest. As the environment grows quieter and slower, the nervous system mirrors that change. Muscles release their habitual tension. The shoulders drop, the jaw loosens, even the tiny muscles around the eyes soften. Snow does not command the body to relax. It simply creates the conditions where relaxation becomes inevitable. Snow alters how the mind understands effort and reward. The transformation of the world happens without visible strain. There is no struggle in its arrival. The land does not resist. The sky does not rush. Everything accepts the change quietly. Snow teaches that not all meaningful change requires effort or conflict. Some changes arrive through surrender. Snow quietly changes how the heart interprets quiet moments. Silence under snowfall does not feel empty or lonely. It feels occupied by gentle presence. The heart senses that it is not alone in the quiet. The falling flakes become companions in stillness, keeping the silence from feeling abandoned. Snow reshapes how the body experiences temperature transitions. Instead of abrupt shifts between warm and cold, snowfall creates a gradual cooling of the air. The skin adapts slowly. The breath adjusts naturally. There is no shock to the system. Snow teaches the body how to accept change in gentle stages. Snow transforms the way shadows behave. Under falling snow, shadows lose their sharp edges. They spread softly across the ground and dissolve into light instead of cutting into it. Darkness becomes smooth instead of jagged. The night learns how to be gentle. Snow encourages the mind to release unanswered questions. Under snowfall, the need to understand, explain, or resolve weakens. The moment feels complete without explanation. Snow teaches that not every experience needs to be solved. Some are simply meant to be felt. Snow becomes a quiet instructor of humility. It falls without seeking attention. It covers everything without preference. It treats rooftops and forests, streets and mountains with the same gentle care. Snow reminds the mind that greatness does not require importance. Snow changes how the body experiences gravity at rest. As the world slows, the sensation of being pulled downward feels heavier and more comforting. The body sinks deeper into beds, chairs, and stillness. Snow encourages the body to yield to gravity instead of resisting it. Snow reminds the mind that rest is part of movement, not its opposite. The season of falling snow is not the absence of life's rhythm, it is one of its quiet phases. Snow teaches that slowing down is not stopping, it is simply shifting into a softer tempo. As the snowfall continues its quiet descent beyond the edges of our imagination, allow the world around you to feel softer, quieter, and more distant. The motion of the day has faded. The urgency of sound has dissolved. What remains is the gentle rhythm of breath, the slow settling of the body, and the silent companionship of falling snow. Each flake has done its work without being seen or heard, reshaping the night through patience alone. Snow does not teach through words, it teaches through presence, through the way it arrives without force, changes without conflict, and leaves without resistance. It covers the sharpness of the world and turns it into something gentle enough to rest upon. Even when the storm has passed, its quiet influence remains, lingering in softened streets, dimmed skies, and calmer minds. Now, as your thoughts grow heavier and your breathing steadies into its natural rhythm, let the snowfall carry you the rest of the way into sleep. There is nothing left to hold, nothing left to solve. The night has already settled in for you. The world is quiet. The body is safe. The mind is free to drift. Thank you for spending this peaceful moment with the Sleepy Scientist. If this quiet journey brought you comfort, you're always welcome to return. Until next time, may your dreams be slow, your rest be deep, and your night be as silent and gentle as falling snow. Sleep well. Good night.